And it's another night here in the studio. And once again, I will be first reading another chapter, and then after that I will be answering any questions that you may have. So basically, for those of you just tuning in, this is just a continuing story I'm telling and editing, live editing basically, while I'm doing a read through. I haven't read this manuscript before, but I need to read through, kind of mark out anything that's jumping out at me as awkward, and then go on from there. Do revision. So, without further ado, here goes the story. Chapter 8. Mustering for War. How are you thinking to be able to use the talisman if you can't read? He gave her an embarrassed smile. To tell the truth, I hadn't thought of it at all. Never had to read, so never thought of it as necessary. And to be truthful about it, it was you who first said I must use the talisman. I suppose we might get someone to read it for me? Too inefficient. Best we have taught you to read. Too inefficient. Best we have taught you to read. Me? Certainly not. Wardish Garden Guide, why not? It's nothing I've ever done before. The likes of me don't do that sort of thing. She shook her head. That bird won't sing. You can't tell me you've never learned anything new. And before you learned it, it was nothing you've done before. So? He shook his head in admiration. No wonder you're the prospective queen. People aren't allowed to say no to you. Do you have someone around who could teach me? We have. I think we should get started immediately. Don't you? Vaharad the scribe came to meet Thoughtgoal in his quarters. His quarters were one small room, though for a man used to sleeping wherever there was a shelter, it was big enough. It had a large window looking out on a garden, not too well kept these days, with a clear stream running just below. It also boasted one tattered wall hanging, portraying some clash of warriors long ago. He suspected it even predated Thogar Peacemaker, for there was no sign of a phalanx anywhere, just infantry and cavalry ranks clashing and loosing arrows and hacking away at each other. Vaharad the scribe was a man of middle years, with a bent for sarcasm. So, you are required to learn to read. I suppose it wouldn't be too much to ask if you recognize any letters at all? I recognize Narnash's name when I see it on a coin. Ha! Wonderful. Are you aware that the name that you see it as you see it on the coins is in abbreviated form? That it only consists of the consonants N, R, N, S, H without the vowels? No, I don't know what a consonant is, nor a vowel either. And until very recently, I was very happy that way. Vaharad glared. We shall do better, young sir, if you show more respect. Lucy was furious. Do you have any idea what it has cost me to mollify Vaharad? He demanded the lash for you, and it appears to have been within his rights. I only interceded on your behalf because I know that the lash would have the wrong effect, making you less willing than more willing to work with us. And you, all you can do is sit there with that smirk on your face. She stared at him for a moment and then asked, What did you do to him? Surely he told you. I asked, but he became incoherent. Involved laying hands on his person? What happened? Why, we had some words, he and I, about respect, and it ended with me holding him upside down by the ankle over a nice little stream that flows by my window, until he asked me politely to put him down. Lucy, who had herself suffered under the scribe's tutelage at a younger age, found herself hard put to suppress a giggle. You didn't. Oh, I assure you that I did. She pulled herself upright and hoped her slip had not been too obvious. Then I require you must not do it so again. He is not the easiest person to work with, but we have little time to waste. Suppose I put it to you that any more such incidents will result in fines to be taken out of your wages, and the payment going to mollify the scribe? I'll do what I can, but after a time, the loss of a gold piece will seem little enough cost. She nodded. For my part, I will ask the scribe to moderate his own behavior when dealing with someone unused to our ways. She turned and left the room quickly, almost rushed to her own chambers. Servants who saw her along the way wondered why she was biting her lip. At least one muttered that someone ought to teach that baton a lesson, upsetting the lady and all. They were more mystified to hear from her room the sound of first the sound of giggles, then outright laughter. Vaharad, displaying only a bare touch of wariness, once more stood in Thotkel's quarters. Now, you have before you a board with the letters carved at the top. The first sound, ah. Will you please say that? Ah. Very good. Now, you will please take the charcoal stick and write that letter. Fair for a first attempt. The bottom stem must be a little longer. Try once more. Thotgal would have been amused to know that Lucy had assured Vaharad that his person would be protected as much as possible. But it was well known batons were touchy-tempered, and no punishment could bring Vaharad back if the worst happened. Narnish sat... Okay. Narnish sat on his horse quietly, watching the troop contingents march in. They came in, battalion by battalion, striding along, very aware of the king watching. He knew that, for all their pride, most of them had little more than a week's training, if that. However, they would do. He turned to the aide beside him. The muster seems to be progressing well. How are our numbers? 800 horse, 6,000 pikemen, 1,200 light troops, Highness. Archers? 400 of the light troops are archers, and we have one horse archer unit as well, numbering 200. Good. Any word from Lord Discoman? He sent a galloper to say that he expects that he will join us tomorrow. Does he? Good. Very good. And what of provisions? Well in hand, Highness. We have sufficient whole grain for 7 days, sufficient milled grain for 3 more, and our ovens are busily turning out bread. We have rounded up sheep and goats locally to provide meat for us until we reach Ascos. Good enough. Have we any dependable estimate as to just what the numbers Ascos can field against us? Our various sources differ widely, Highness, but we expect from 500 to 700 horse, 4,000 to 8,000 pikemen, and 2,000 light troops. Who do we have out there gathering intelligence? A pack of knuckleheads who can't count? Perhaps we should require them to explain their estimates if they differ so widely. One might think they're trying to mislead their king. Most of our spies are half-breeds, hoping to win acceptance by taking on risks for you, Highness. Then we have other renegade Ascos simply working for pay, and some few once in disguise. It appears there is a rough pattern when reports overlap. The numbers we get from the renegades are higher, lower for the Wents, and in the middle for the half-breeds. The pattern is not so consistent as to be able to make the basis for any real action, without the loss of half our spies or more. The king nodded absently. I see. But I'm not happy. Pass the word that we should prefer better estimates, that I should get by tossing knucklebones. Yes, Highness. The aide was already at work in his mind, trying to word the king's demand in a way that would not discourage those people risking a horrible death to provide intelligence for him. 2 guards marched to the door of Dr. Gobnash's workroom, and one rapped sharply on it. The doctor himself did not open it, but rather a man of average size and build who limped when he walked. Can I be of service? The king requests the presence of Dr. Gobnash. I shall inform him. The door closed in their faces. At any other door in Wens Ascos, the guards would have pounded on the door, perhaps even knocked it down and dragged away the person they sought. This was not any other door. They traded looks, then in silent agreement went back to tell the king that his message had been passed. The king was therefore not a cheerful monarch when Dr. Gobnash appeared. I would appreciate prompt response to my summons, the king declared. The doctor, as though intent on inflaming the situation further, shrugged. I was involved with a situation that would not permit me to drop it, no matter how important the summons, and I'm here now. The king took a deep breath. Sometime, he promised himself, I will decide I can do without your services. The thought made him smile. I suppose it is too much to hope that this important matter had anything to do with the location of the talisman brought to the Ascos? And a means to defeat it? No, Highness, it was not that. But my searching and scrying, along with the work of certain spies, have allowed me to discover certain things. The ox driver who had brought the talisman has been secluded daily with a scribe. And the general story is the ox driver is being taught to read. It would almost seem he himself is going to use the talisman. The king broke in. You told me first off that he was merely a messenger, carrying the talisman to the one who would actually wield it. Now you seem to have changed your mind. Was your information not as good as you claimed? The elegant beige-covered shoulders shrugged again. Highness, my information was as good as could be. I cannot be completely certain, given the shielding influence of the talisman, but it would almost seem that sometime during the journey, the talisman became attuned to the ox driver. This would seem ridiculous, though. Tresorio would have hardly been so careless with his messenger. Yet this explanation does fit the facts. You're saying that the talisman may not be ready for use? I would promise nothing, Highness. How complex are the instructions? How much learning, if any, does the ox driver already have? All I can say at the time of my latest information, some 2 days after the event, I do not believe the ox driver to be capable of using the talisman against us. Sorry. Paper. I do not believe the ox driver to be capable of using the talisman against us. My own muster is not complete yet, but... He turned to his aide. Pass orders that we will march tomorrow. Some contingents will have to force their march to catch us en route. He turned back to the doctor. Thank you, doctor. But I will still rejoice to see the day when I can dispense with your services. Thakko was walking in the old city's market, which, like markets everywhere, roared and clattered around him. It was a little small after Saragos, but that didn't bother Thakko. The usual stature of Thogar Peacemaker stood on a much shorter and plainer column. It was a market, though, and in all its boisterous disorder was cheery to Thakko. Lucy had asked him, not ordered him, which would have provoked the wrong reaction, to stay out of the less savory parts of the city. This meant he would not likely find places to toss the dwarf's bones, but he seemed to have drifted into a position where he had promised to use the talisman for Lucy, which meant staying alive to do so. He had changed one of his gold pieces back at the palace for its equivalent in silver, not wishing to walk around flashing gold in the marketplace, no matter how law-abiding the people were. The market was bright and loud. Voices clattered. Yep, voices loud, voices clattering in both the common language and what he had to assume was the local languages of Ascos. This was interesting, as the common language had replaced local languages almost entirely in the major cities. One still found people here and there obstinately holding on to their language, though not usually where it might have had an effect on their livelihood, such as the major marketplaces. Though marketplaces in large cities were usually safe, Thakkel had gotten used to being aware of his surroundings. He was therefore alert to the four men almost as soon as they had taken up their positions. Through the shouting clatter of the bazaar, he first noticed one man who didn't seem to belong. He stood about Thakkel's height, though broader, and he looked like one he'd seen a lot of fights. His arms were thick and muscular, and his knuckles bore old scars, though his face was unmarked save for a small scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He was looking over a produce stall, but there was nothing about him of the air of one who knew what he was looking for. Taking a trinket from the stall in front of him, Thakkel held it up, turning around this way and that to look at it in a different lighting. Spotting the rest of the party, their positions, it seemed that either Thakkel or someone nearby was their target. The way one lived to a ripe old age, in his kind of life, was to assume he was the target. He smiled inwardly. And the lady Lusomi wanted me to stay in the main market where I'd be safe. He tossed the trinket back on the stall, ignoring the stallkeeper's insistent shout that this piece was really a bargain, that he hadn't even spoken about price. He walked over to the produce stall, taking care not to completely ignore the tough, which would be as much a giveaway as staring him in the eye. Instead, he looked at him and appeared to dismiss him, turning instead to the stall itself. He picked up a melon from a stack and tossed the vendor a silver coin. The vendor gasped in shock. Even a wild barbarian knew a silver coin should buy nearly half the vendor's stock. Thakkel whirled and threw the melon at the tough's head. Now look what you've done, you great clumsy bumbling oaf of ox dung. The man was caught by surprise. Thakkel was doing much what they had planned him to do. He raised his hand just too late to ward off the melon, and by the time he had reached for the cudgel thrust through his belt, Thakkel had kicked him in the groin. As he was falling, Thakkel laid the ox goad across the side of his head for good measure, and moved off to meet the others. There were the other three were also surprised, but they had little more time to react, to get ready to carry out their job. Thakkel moved so that, rather than having to face them all at once, he could meet one alone for at least a moment. He feinted a thrust at the man's middle, and when his assailant struck to ward that off, swung back a backhand at the man's forehead, which had dropped where he stood. The other two were coming at him, trying to take him from the two sides, while the market crowd screamed and shouted and tried to move away from them. Thakkel jumped over, warded a down blow from the cudgel of the man moving to his left, at the same time kicking him in the shin. He then turned to the other, who was coming in, his club upraised, thrust the point of the ox goad in his throat, then parried the cudgel's weakened downward swing. Whirling again, he saw the other man trying to limp away, caught up with him in 2 steps, and hit him in the back, across the back of the head. From the look of the man he'd stabbed, he was no longer any trouble, possibly never again any trouble. Thakkel moved off, with no one hindering him. He knew he could use the Lady Lusoma's name to avoid trouble, but he didn't like the thought. Having had experience in this, dodging the city watch in various cities over the years, he was able to make his way back to the palace. A servant summoned him a little while later to appear in Lucy's quarters again. I understand you bought an expensive melon today. Thaco looked up at Lusomi. Well, she was smiling, so matters couldn't be that bad. You've got your spies watching me? No, but a quarter of the city knows I have a guest from Batanji. And Batans are very few in Ascos. And Batans are very few in Ascos, you understand. So when a Batan kills or seriously injures 4 men in the market square using a stick with a metal tip, it's a foreseen conclusion that the masters of the market will bring it to my attention. No, you needn't frown so. The watch did their own investigation and the men were all known to the watch. So far as the watch captain is concerned, you did the city a favor. Those were not the sort of fellows that usually haunt the market. It was her turn to frown. No, they aren't. That suggests they were hired to find you and attack you. I suppose the better question is, by whom? Dr. Gobnash? She shook her head. No, not Dr. Gobnash's way. His way is a quick knife in the ribs by some harmless-looking person, or something fatal slipped into a drink. I'm afraid I know who, but I'm also afraid there's little I can do. Who? She looked hesitant. He demanded again. Who? Have I no right to know my enemy's name? Suddenly, the answer came. Dalthorio! Fierce flying pig guts. It's Dalthorio, isn't it? It is. And without the forces he can bring to the muster, we would be in sad shape. Not merely for the lack of forces themselves, which would be bad enough, but there are many others who, seeing our numbers lessen, will be less eager to support us. They may do such things as coming to muster too late to the march, or merely melting away on the battlefield. So, even though I'm certain who is behind it, I must pretend I have no idea, and I must ask you to join me in the pretense. On my part, I will see to it that you are well guarded. Wardash, keep me from being a ruler. It seems a ruler is required to be courteous to the people he'd like to punch in the face. How did you come to choose this life? Frowning, she shook her head. I didn't choose it. It chose me. My family were only minor cousins to the royalty, high enough to have considerable land, but not so high as to even consider the notion of taking rule. You may not have heard, but most of the old families have protective talismans. As it has been explained to me, they are little more than very powerful good luck talismans, specifically tailored against violence. However, even the best of luck will eventually fail, so the family suffered grievously. First of all, many sons went to battle, and in battle the effectiveness of the talismans was reduced. When the great battle against the first Narnish failed, many fell. He and his successors proscribed all the old families. Assassinations and skirmishes, illnesses and accidents cut back the numbers. My own close family were dead, and I was living at an old hunting lodge with a few servants. One day, a body of nobles rode up to inform me I was the heir to the throne of Ascos. It had not been so simple as they made it sound. The fact that none of them would support any of the others as a king, the fact was that none of the others would support any of the others as king, so they picked me. A mere girl. They could bend to their will and as need be. Fortunately, I was not entirely untaught. I had read some histories. Valharad the scribe takes credit for that. And I knew some pitfalls to avoid. Mostly I avoided immediate decisions, no matter who pressed me, saying it was a matter requiring some thought. I asked advice when I was able, found as much as I could of the reasons why this person might be demanding that, and mostly made decisions that left no one entirely unhappy. I also gathered a few people whom I usually give me unbiased advice, and made sure that when there were biases, I knew about them. So here I am. She paused. So now, it's your turn. Tell me how one such as you becomes an ox driver. It seems an odd use of your talents. I spent the usual childhood in Batanji, practicing with wooden swords. Certain I was going to become a famous warrior, covering myself with glory. When the king, I never knew which king, called up warriors from our village, the elders declared I was too young to go. I recall what a sulky and bad-tempered brat I became over that. 21 young men marched away from our village. 3 returned. My elder brother came back lacking a right hand, and another had a leg which no longer served him. He walked with a crutch, his left leg dragging in the dust. The third had no wounds, but a sickness of the chest which kept him from all but the lightest of chores. I've learned since then that such losses are not always common to every village. At the time, though, I was horrified. My brother had been stronger, more skilled than I, yet he came back with no glory, just a crippling injury that left him an angry and bitter man at 18. I gave up practice with wooden swords and found myself a place as a helper in an ox train and went traveling. The next time the king called on our village for warriors, I would be far away. I discovered, of course, that even in the world of merchant trains there were reasons why a man must fight, reasons having nothing to do with kings and armies. My training with wooden swords had not entirely been wasted, though a sword is an expensive item for an ox driver. I eventually had the ox goad made to my specifications and learned to live in the places ox drivers frequent. By the time I could afford a sword, I no longer really needed one. And so, every so often, I do a little kicking a Zotani in the behind and get in trouble for it. Do you have any hopes or any plans for the future? Other than surviving long enough to leave Ascos, you mean? Oh, I suppose I'll keep on traveling. Working for this caravan master or that. Perhaps if the dwarves' bones fall right and I get the money, I might set up a train of my own, hauling for this merchant or that. Suddenly his circumstances struck him. That's right. If I see this through, I'll be nigh unto rich, won't I? Perhaps the notion of my own train is not so far off. And you'll bring goods to the Royal Lady of Ascos by special commission? He grinned, taking up the notion. But of course. The finest silks from faraway lands, spices from the land of Condolini, and the jewels from beyond the Zotani lands? Be careful not to kick any behinds on the way, though. She was laughing, but this comment sobered him. I'll have to watch where I go. I show up in the wrong place, and there'll be half-faces hunting me before I can breathe twice. How long will they carry on that feud? The Zotani? I've heard of such feuds lasting 20 years or more. No way of getting out of it? Buying your way clear, something like that? He shook his head. I'm not sure. Never heard of it being done. He shook his head. That's a problem for later on, though. First I'll have to survive this year. The next day, the situation became more pressing. Lucy walked into the chamber just as Vaharad was explaining a naughty phrase in the initial chapter of Zoltario's ride through Algasor. Vaharad, would you excuse us for a moment? Certainly, lady. He walked from the room with the air of one just taking enough time, but not so much as to earn him a reprimand. When he had gone, she took a small piece of paper from her pocket. A messenger bird has just come from one of our agents in Wentz. Previous report was that Narnish was mustering for war. This report says 4 days ago, he and most of his army have begun to march. So the reading lessons will have to be rushed? She nodded. He knows we have the Talisman. We can't rule out rumor of your reading lessons reaching him. And if he couldn't guess the meaning of that, Dr. Gabnesh certainly could. He hopes to be honest before you've mastered the use of the Talisman. I suppose it's too much to hope he's wrong? Well, ever since my first lesson, when all I was certain of were the shapes of letters, particularly an A, I unrolled the scroll just to see what I could make of it, if only to see every place where A occurred. Last night I discovered I could make out every word, but by then I was becoming fascinated with the idea of reading. That someone 1,000 miles away and 100 years ago could set their thoughts down on a matter and I could read them here, today. There are still some things unclear about the instruction scroll, but I could speed matters up by asking about them specifically. You've been wasting our time? There was an edge of wrath to her voice. He held up a hand, almost as if warding off a blow. No, not really wasting time. There are some sentences where I know every word, but the sentence makes no sense. I was trying to get around that by asking about various meanings a word might have. I thought the fewer people who know of any exact wordings of the instruction. She still frowned, but was now in concentration. You're right about that. Vaharad is a very good teacher, but a little prone to self-importance. My people have already had words with him regarding muttering over a wine cup about the very important student he's teaching, and by the request of the royal lady, no less. If you were to ask him about some mysterious sentence, I can only guess what he'd do. Do you have any possible suggestions? At some time, someone is going to have to explain these sentences to me. Would you object to taking lessons from me? He grinned. Not at all, but won't some of your people object? Some will, of course, but I'll explain the situation to the ones that matter. I doubt there's a person in the city who doesn't know you've brought something special to help in our war against Narnesh. Knowing I'm meeting with you to help plan how to use the thing will be all the explanation needed by most. Lord Disikowen was on the march and was annoyed. The galloper was rattling off his message, the point being that Narnesh had hurried his departure and trusted Lord Disikowen would overtake him shortly. Nor was Lord Disikowen mollified to learn several other commanders were left in the same situation as he. Narnesh had not left any instructions as to the victualling. Right. Just because you know a fancy word doesn't mean you should use it. Said by me, not part of the story. This meant he either paid out of his own funds, a physical impossibility, or he gathered his supplies in the king's name on the king's lands. He could see where this led in its turn. The king now had another weapon to use against him if he decided to turn against him. Requisitioning supplies in the king's name on the king's land could be made to sound very much like an intention to supplant the king. The man had wound up his message. Disikowen waved a dismissive hand. Find yourself something to drink, a bite to eat. No return message just yet. Finding himself alone with his son, he asked, You understand the import of this all? The king has marched without his full muster. He clearly feels anxious about what the Ascos might do and hopes to forestall them by making the first move? Very good. So as far as it goes. But he has left no borders for our provisioning. How do you read that? That we are expected to gather our own supplies? Ah, so simple. But there is no specific order, written or verbal, to that effect. And if King Narnesh decides Lord Disikowen Rashadin is getting too high and mighty, why, there's proof. He went on requisitioning supplies in the king's name on the king's land, just as if he were the king himself. The boy had long ago ceased to be surprised at the notion of duplicity among rulers. But we've given him no reason to fear, Father. The Sycoman smiled grimly. What is considered a cause by a ruler is not necessarily what you and I might think. The line of Narnish Skalslad was survived by using bloody means to cut back whatever seems a threat. And when the Sycoman Rishadan appears to be growing richer, more popular among the nobles, that fact alone, without any oversight of treachery, may mark him in Narnish's mind as a dangerous man. There was a silence then, but for the sounds of horses' hooves and the noise of the army marching behind. He hoped Falsedon would not ask him how one was to survive in a situation where good stewardship and good fortune might be taken as tokens of possible treason. The only answer he could give was the one tried to guess The only answer he could give was that the one tried to guess was what thought in the palace and prepare for any eventuality. As far as answers, that was no ambush, Father, watch out. Okay, and that was also really awkwardly worded, so as you could hear me stumbling, bear with me here. With clear and horrible slowness of such events, the matter unfolded. Oh dear. Falsedon put himself and his horse between his father and the men standing up in the brush at the roadside. The Sycoman flung himself from the saddle to haul the young man down, only to feel the impact of arrows. Feel the boy go limp. They'd been wearing leather, this far inside friendly territory, and the 3 arrows had gone through cleanly deep into the boy's chest. Oblivious to the shouting and chasing and screaming of horses, the Sycoman watched helplessly as his son quietly stopped breathing. The bandits are being pursued, Lord. He did not look up. Bandits? Bandits who attack an armed force of soldiers? Ascos then, Lord? He did not answer that. He pulled himself stiffly to his feet. He was old and weary, and life's taste had suddenly gone bitter. He looked up on the horizon and supposed the direction of the king's march. Oh, Narnish. Narnish, did you fear me so much? Did you think to kill me and then bend my son to your will? Or is your only thought, that man worries me, away with him? Always a slippery thought, is it, Narnish Skalslad? Attack someone slyly and the others will understand the message? Oh yes, Narnish, never my king again. I will certainly follow you into Ascos, and you may have the joy of it when I do. And that's the end of this chapter for the evening. Wow. Okay, I was not expecting that. So if you haven't been reading, if you haven't been listening, I've been reading. If you haven't been listening so far, you can go back and listen to the previous broadcast. And at this point, what I'm going to do is if you guys have any questions, I can sit around for a few minutes and answer questions if you have any. What's the story about? That sort of thing. And if not, I can wrap it up and you can hear me talk again tomorrow and read another chapter in the story and do the editing. That's all part of this. I'm wrapping it all into one thing. It is reading and editing. So you get to hear me stumble over words and be awkward because I'm practicing trying to read all the time. Get used to reading in front of people and trying to deliver better than he said, she said, and it was great. Trying to put a little character and voice in it. I think it's easier to try and say these things when it's your own words that you've written. So this not being my own, I kind of have to guess what his intent was. Luckily, I've known my dad all my life, so for several decades, I knew him. So I kind of I think I have a good handle on how he would have spoken, that sort of thing. Yeah, so without further ado, I guess that's it for tonight. I will talk to you all again tomorrow when I bring forth another chapter of Talisman of the Winds. Take care, guys.